carcass of the Irish banking system. These billions in profit were facilitated by weak politicians looking for a quick win and what appears to be civil servants and bankers looking for a new job. Is it any wonder that Wilbur Ross, Fairfax, Prem Watson, Kennedy Wilson regularly hail Richie Boucher as a hero of the Irish banking system when he's been so instrumental in making these investors billions and billions of euros in profit? This vulture triumvirate have made billions and billions from the collapse of the Irish financial system, a collapse that was overseen and led by the same man who they now herald as their financial hero. There's no question that the profits these people have made are the stuff of Wall Street legend. Heroic is a good description. But I find it hard to believe that when the cameras are off and the journalists have gone home, that Wilbur Ross, Fairfax and Kennedy Wilson think of Richie Boucher and this government as anything other than amateurs in a game that the big boys always win. This is the same sort of neoliberal or establishment philosophy, this same philosophy exists in Europe too, where the boys in Frankfurt have scant regard for bullying a country that represents just 1% of the entire Eurozone into bailing out unguaranteed, unsecured senior bondholders. 3 years after bullying one tiny nation's taxpayers into bailing out bank bondholders, the ECB imposed the exact same financial bullying tactics on Cyprus to make ordinary depositors and taxpayers pay the price for the lending mistakes of the banks. For the educated financiers in Frankfurt, countries like Ireland or Cyprus, sovereign countries rich with history, culture and independent spirit, represent a dot in the financial ocean that is the Eurozone. They are an irrelevant distraction whose peoples can be squeezed for every euro they earn in order to preserve the integrity of the Eurozone financial system and, as they see it, the greater common good. In the summer of 2012, when Spain or Italy faced the financial abyss that Ireland faced, Frankfurt did not tell these countries to get in line or that a bomb would go off in Madrid or Milan if they did not. The ECB panicked. They saw their own personal credibility on the line, and they saw the financial implosion of the Eurosystem as their legacy. Instead of threatening proverbial bombs like our minister faced, Spain, Italy, and the entire Eurozone economy were given the Draghi pledge that has fundamentally altered the Eurozone crisis. The ECB will buy whatever it takes. Ireland could have done with this Draghi pledge 4 years ago, when we piled 64 billion of Irish taxpayers' money into a financial drain on bondholders, bankers and pension funds across the world. Those same international investors and foreign newspaper writers who backslap this government for restoring the international credibility of this country are the same group of people captured by the financiers who profited in the billions from the taxes of Irish workers and Irish families. This country will sink as quickly as it has risen from the ashes unless we achieve a write-down on this bank debt. Bank losses debt. I listened carefully to the Minister for Finance recently explain that he was having a hard time pleading for a bank debt deal with his European colleagues. The reason he explained he was having a hard time was because our bond yields are now lower than many of the countries who would have to contribute to such a write-down. It's pathetic. The Irish people and media, by and large, trust Michael Noonan when he speaks. They trust his words and admire his Limerick wit. The Irish people also, by and large, trusted Bertie Ahern when he spoke. They admired his words and were dazzled by his political acumen. As long as the economy grows and the population's spending power improves, statistics on national debt, to which we cannot afford, will be a distant mirage for most people in their day-to-day lives. Medical cards, carers' allowances, all the things that make for a tough life at the moment. Young people abroad, hollow job bridge jobs. We should get real with Europe. This false dawn will not last forever, the one that's being celebrated today with the government parties. Eventually, the large economies of Italy and Spain will be insulated to such an extent that the ECB will no longer be required to step in and bail them out. Why does anyone believe that at the next time of crisis, the ECB will look more kindly on this nation? Of course they won't. All the hard-earned economic gains that taxpayers will have made, the sufferings will be in vain and will be thrown to the wolves again, as we were in the past. Starry-eyed diplomacy where we seek the love and adoration of our partners in Europe or our financiers in Frankfurt has not served this nation well. The lowering of interest rates on our official sector bonds, the restructuring of our promissory note, which wasn't really a restructuring, that was a given. I haven't time to show that, how that occurred. And the extension of the maturity of our loans are all welcome events which have improved the debt profile of the country, but they're by no means even close to sufficient. How can it be that not the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, or any government minister has stood up here during the debate and told this House or the Irish people that they will fight with every ounce of their being for a write-down on the Irish bank losses debt? Even Brian Hayes, who is a declared candidate for the European Parliament elections, is silent on the issue. So much so, Brian recently publicly confirmed, and I quote, "I just think now is the time where we continue to negotiate, and it's better that these are done effectively behind closed doors." I've heard that for 3 years. Amazingly, other candidates running for Europe including Eamon Ryan, the former minister, who's openly acknowledged that, some of his cabinet colleagues were asleep in bed when the cabinet secretary phoned them to ask whether they supported the guarantee of 400 billion of bank debt on the backs of the Irish taxpayer. The same former minister who described Morgan Kelly's calculated assessment in May 2010 as a prophet of doom for claiming the country would become insolvent unless it abandoned its policies to bail out the banks. 4 months later, the Marion Hotel was booked out, and teams of economists from Frankfurt, Brussels, and Washington launched their economic takeover of this state. By the way, on that night, the 28th of November, it was a snowy, cold night. I was in RTE with Miles Dungan. 135 billion was the amount of money that the 6 Irish banks owe the ECB. That's why they were here. It's just shocking. And Ashoka Modi, who was the chef de keep of the IMF element of the Troika, he has said we should be getting debt right down. 6 weeks ago, Ken Rogoff in Davos said we should be getting it right down. It's the right thing for Europe to do. And yet, we haven't heard their voices. That's my point. Let's get real for a second. The Irish people had a decade of platitudes and false dawns, which resulted in what the IMF called the single largest financial crisis in human history. That is quite an accolade of failure that the previous government oversaw. This government, okay, it stabilised the plans of others, but it's cut public spending, increased taxes, and reduced the gap between taxation and expenditure. They were all on the plan anyway. I mean, so what? But our debt mountain is such that not even Hillary and Tenzing would be able to climb it. Household debt at 172 billion represents 105% of our GDP. Non-financial corporate debt, 330 billion, or 202% of GDP, and government debt, 193 billion, or 118% of GDP. A total combined debt of 695 billion, or 425% of GDP, the highest in any so-called developed country in the OECD. We have a massive, insurmountable debt problem that the Minister for Finance tells us is sustainable, and as Junior Minister Hayes says, should be quietly negotiated behind closed doors. The government bonds that the Irish government was forced to issue by the ECB to repay the debt it had provided to Anglo-Irish Bank should be cancelled, written off. Tell Patrick O'Neill, keys please, cancel them, they're odious. The Irish taxpayer doesn't owe this debt, didn't incur these losses and doesn't owe this debt. They can't afford it. Writing off the debt, cancelling it from the balance sheet of the European Central Bank would only be a dot on the financial ocean that is the Eurozone. But it would be the important ignition for the sustainable economic recovery of this island. Secondly, the ESM must be used as a vehicle to retroactively capitalise the Irish taxpayer for the investments it has put into our Bank of Ireland, AIB and Permanent TSB. Again, these billions of euro invested were largely done at the behest of maintaining stability in the European financial system. We paid our price, and now the taxpayer should be given the relief for the sacrifice it has made. The government has fallen completely short of its pre-election promises. I'm very conscious of this as being someone who ran for Fine Gael in the last election. Since then I've been, as you know, expelled. During the campaign, Minister Varadkar promised the Irish people with much gusto that not another cent would be given to Anglo-Irish Bank. Fine Gael subsequently published a banking policy document that promised the Irish electorate, if elected, Fine Gael would unilaterally impose losses on senior bondholders in Anglo and Irish nationwide if our European partners did not agree. And of course, the most famous of all the great rhetoric came from the Taoiseach, who told the Irish people they had two stark choices, Frankfurt's way or Labour's way. I really question how a Minister for State for Finance who believes we should adopt the same tactics that have failed to get us a bank debt deal is in any way equipped or sufficiently fired up for the Irish people to send into Europe to get us a deal.
Thank you, Deputy.
We've really entered the realms of Twilight Zone stuff for the Irish people to even contemplate sending Eamon Ryan, the former Cabinet Minister who sunk Ireland into the economic abyss, out to Europe to negotiate for us a deal on our bank debt. He'd be laughed out of the Parliament trying to convince the larger countries that even though he was the Minister who sealed our fate with the bank guarantee, he's asking them to forgive him for his 400 billion mistake and compensate the error.
Thank you, Deputy. Could I ask the Deputy to move that the debate be adjourned?
I've only one more sentence, Count Corliffe. Yeah. What kind of message would the Irish people be sending to Europe if we send such representatives to our bidding? Last sentence. The failure of this government to include a 50 billion, that's about the size of it, debt losses right down from Europe as the overriding priority underpinning all our engagements with our European counterparts is a failure that will cost the Irish taxpayer dearly. We need to get our money back from Europe, because if we don't, my children, your children and our children's children will face the same catastrophic financial costs that this generation has already faced.
Thank you,
we were led to trust the kindness of strangers. Have we been left out on a limb to be disappointed by the strangers to kindness?
Thank you. Could I ask you, Deputy?